Good evening, everyone. My name is Beth Stearman, and I'm the Administrative Director of the Vassar Center for BRCA at the University of Pennsylvania. In honor of National Hereditary Cancer Week, and on behalf of the Vassar Center's Black and BRCA initiative, and our event partners at Sisters R Us Circle of Survivors in Pennsylvania, My Style Matters in Georgia, Wawela Cancer Support in Texas, and the Cancer Awareness Network in Alabama, I'd like to welcome you to tonight's panel, Empowering Generations, Have You Had the Family Cancer Talk? The opinions and experiences shared tonight are the panelists' own and do not represent those of the organizations mentioned. You should consult with your healthcare team should you have any questions about the specifics of your health and medical plan. I'd like to point out that tonight's session will be recorded, so the host will be asking people to turn off their camera and video and audio, and then during the panel, and then once we have a question and answer period, you can feel free to turn your camera back on. If you would like to remove your name, feel free to do so for privacy purposes. Throughout the event, you can enter questions for the panelists into the chat feature, and we'll get to as many of them as possible. I'd like to thank our panelists for joining us this evening for this important conversation about how to discuss family cancer history and the value of genetic counseling from the clinician perspective of Vassar's genetic counselor, Danielle McKenna, and from the patient perspectives of Tallulah Anderson, her sister Denise Anderson Gant, her niece Romika Gant McLennan, along with our collaborator from Wawela Cancer Support, Patricia McCoy, and her sister Deborah Harris. Our moderator this evening is Loretta Herring. Loretta is the CEO and co-founder of the Cancer Awareness Network, one of this evening's event partner organizations. The Cancer Awareness Network is a local nonprofit organization based in Birmingham, Alabama, designed to empower cancer patients and survivors. Loretta's work spans over 20 years of advocacy as a voice for the underserved and offering hope on their cancer journey. Her organization offers financial assistance, house cleaning, and resource support for participants in the local community. Loretta also developed the telehealth service program with the mission to prepare in-home educators to serve as liaisons between healthcare providers and clients, teaching computer literacy skills and training to underserved individuals in the cancer community. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to our moderator, Loretta Herring.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much, Beth, for that great introduction. We have great panelists today. We have Danielle McKenna. She's a licensed certified geneticist counselor at the Vassar Center for BRCA at the University of Pennsylvania. Danielle works with patients and families prior to genetic testing to help them understand the process, as well as helping navigate what they learn because test results are available. We also have with us Tallulah Anderson. She is the founder of 2 for 2 Booths based in the suburbs of Washington, D.C. She is unique family history. She has unique family history, losing both her mom and her dad to breast cancer, and is herself a 3-time breast cancer survivor, having undergone several surgeries, and in the process, learned she carries the BRCA2 mutation inherited from her dad. Tallulah has been a cancer-free for 7 years, yay. Her organization is dedicated toward providing education, information, and connecting to resources on breast cancer and early detection to support Black men and women in learning their family history, lowering their risks. Tallulah's sister, Denise Anderson Gant, and her niece, Denise's daughter, Romika Gant McCullen, joins us today also. They are both BRCA2 gene mutation carriers and breast cancer survivors undergoing double mastectomy 3 years apart, and share that they are now living their best lives ever. We also have on our panel today, Patricia McCoy. She is an 8-year breast cancer survivor and co-founder of Wawela Cancer Support. Prior to being diagnosed with breast cancer, her treatment physician went back and forth with her insurance company for nearly 3 years to gain approval for Patricia to be tested for the BRCA1 and BRCA2 mutation based off her family history of cancer, which included her mother, her father, 2 siblings, an aunt, and an uncle. It wasn't until Patricia was diagnosed with breast cancer that her insurance company finally approved the testing on which she tested positive for BRCA1 gene mutation. She has 3 living siblings, 2 sisters and 1 brother who have tested positive for the BRCA1 gene mutation in the family. Patricia is joined by her sister, Deborah Harris, sibling number 6 from a family of 10. Deborah will share her experience of being offered genetic testing. Deborah's passion is to advocate for cancer patients, which have increased after experiencing the death of so many family members. She is an active board member with Wawela Cancer Support and is heavily involved in educating their community on how to reduce the risk of developing cancer. Wawela provides financial relief to individuals undergoing treatment and cancer and has hosted a myriad of events on how to reduce the risk of developing chronic illness through fitness and nutrition. Thank you all for agreeing to share your knowledge and experience with us this evening. There will be time for Q&A after the panel discussion. So feel free to put those questions in the chat feature. To set the stage on discussing hereditary cancer, it is important to know that BRCA1 and BRCA2 mutations occur in all populations and increase risk of several different cancers. Scientists know that people of the Ashkenazi Jewish descent have a 1 in 4 chance of carrying this BRCA1 mutation, making them 10 times as likely to carry a BRCA1 mutation as someone in the general population. However, these mutations occur in all racial and ethnic groups in about 1 in 300 people. Harmful mutation in the BRCA1 and BRCA2 genes increase the risk of breast cancer in women and men, ovarian cancer, prostate cancer, and pancreatic cancers. While only 5 or 10% of all breast cancer cases in women are attributed to these types of genes, BRCA1 and BRCA2 mutation, these mutations occur in men and women and can be passed on to sons and daughters, affecting multiple generations in the family. So today we will discuss BRCA1 and BRCA2 in genetic testing. So our goal is to increase our knowledge base and supply you with the tools needed to have quality in dealing with cancer. We know that these gene mutations occur in the African American community, but more studies are needed to determine the effects on African American community dealing with BRCA1 and BRCA2. So let's get started with our panel. Okay, first I'd like to ask Danielle McKenna. Can you set the stage for explaining where hereditary cancers fall within overall picture of cancer?
Sure, and you actually alluded to it in your introduction, Loretta. So we know that if you look at all of breast cancer in general, it's a small percentage, only about 5 to 10% of all individuals with breast cancer will test positive for a mutation in a gene like BRCA1 or 2 that actually explains why that person has breast cancer and often why there's cancer in the family. So it is a small percent of all breast cancers in general, and the vast majority of breast cancers are not that easily explained. So probably due to some combination of aging, environment, maybe genetic factors that are a little bit more complicated for us to understand. But it's a really small percent of all breast cancers where we can truly find a mutation.
Thank you so much. So let's ask this question. What are the cancer risks associated with this inherited BRCA1 mutation in men and women? And then to follow up on that, what about that Black population? Is there an increase in the BRCA1 mutation compared to the general population? And can you just talk about that racial disparities in breast cancer in general? How big is the issue of this? Can you provide that insight for us?
Sure. So in thinking about the cancer risks that we see in individuals who have mutations in BRCA1 and 2, the risk numbers can vary slightly between whether or not you have a mutation in BRCA1 or BRCA2. But in general, we see that women who have a mutation in one of these genes have between a 50 and a 70% lifetime risk of developing breast cancer. So it's a pretty significant risk of breast cancer. We also can see anywhere from a 20 to 50% lifetime risk of ovarian cancer in women that have these mutations. Again, depends a little bit whether it's BRCA1 or BRCA2, because BRCA1 has a higher risk of ovarian cancer than BRCA2 does. And then in men, especially in men with BRCA2 mutations, we can see an increased risk of prostate cancer, potentially as high as 25% over the lifetime, and an increased risk in male breast cancer we can see with both gene mutations, but more with BRCA2. So we see about a 5 to 10% lifetime risk of male breast cancer with BRCA2 genes. And then you also mentioned that there is an increased risk of pancreatic cancer that we can see with BRCA1 and 2 mutations. And so that ranges somewhere between 2 and 5% over the lifetime. So it's not necessarily as high as some of the other cancer risks that we can see, but it is slightly higher than the general population risk of pancreatic cancer, which is a pretty rare cancer in the general population. There have been some recent studies that have looked specifically to determine whether or not there are increased rates of BRCA1 and 2 mutations in the African American community. And Dr. Domchak, the director of the Vassar Center, has been involved in a lot of these studies. And so what they have found is that there are similar rates of BRCA1 and 2 mutations, as well as mutations in other genes related to breast cancer in women who have breast cancer who are African American and who are white. Where the disparities really start to come into play is in the fact that Black women are more likely to die from breast cancer than white women are. Part of that is due to the fact that they're more likely to develop triple negative breast cancer, which is a more aggressive form of breast cancer. And part of that is because we've seen that Black women are more likely to be diagnosed at later stages than white comparison groups. And the other disparity that we've really seen is that Black women are less likely to be referred to see genetics when they have a personal or family history of breast cancer. So we've definitely seen racial disparities in those two areas. And obviously we need a lot of work and improvement in those two areas.
Thank you. Thank you. So let me ask you this before we go on to the other panel.
Loretta, you froze for me. I'm not sure if you've frozen for the other. Yeah.
Am I frozen?
You're unfrozen now, but would you mind just repeating that?
Okay. Can you also describe your role as a genetic counselor and how you help individuals learn about their cancer risk? How does an individual really uncover that risk factor? And I guess we want to turn to our family members also on that. Are there guidelines on how you do this?
Yeah, so in terms of my role as a genetic counselor, one of the first things that I do with every patient that I see is go over their family history of cancer. So whenever possible, it's really important to find out this information about your family history. I'm so sorry, that's my dog. And so it's important to know what type of cancer that family members have, and also approximately how old they were when they were diagnosed. So were they in their 40s? Were they in their 80s? That kind of age range can be helpful in terms of thinking about how likely we are to find a genetic mutation. It's also important to look at both sides of your family history. So there's this common misconception out there that it only really matters about your mom's side of the family, but your dad's side of the family is just as important. So it's helpful to get as much information on your relatives as you can. And Beth just added a link to our family history form. So we have created kind of like a cheat sheet for the information that would be helpful to try and collect prior to a genetic counseling appointment. We know it's not always possible to get this information, but if it is possible, it's helpful to have. And so we go through the family history, and then depending on the family history, I'll perform a quick risk assessment. So just to let the patient know how likely we are to find something genetic here, or what are the chances of us finding something hereditary. And then I will talk about what options there are for genetic testing, because especially in 2021, there's lots of different breast cancer genes that people can be tested for. And so I help them decide what level of testing they are the most interested in, or they think would benefit from the most. And then we talk about implications of what you would do differently if you were to find a mutation in one of those genes, what this would mean for your daughters, nieces, etc. And then we talk about the logistics of the testing. So how to get the sample, what's the likelihood of my insurance covering it, all of those kinds of things. And then what was the second part of your question there? Sorry.
I think
are there guidelines?
The guidelines, yes.
Are there guidelines? So yes, there are guidelines. Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. Yes, there are guidelines for who should have genetic testing, and the list is getting longer all the time. The people who we really don't want to miss, I'm so sorry, are any women who's been diagnosed with breast cancer under the age of 50. That's a pretty important group to capture. Any male with breast cancer is another important group to capture. Any woman, which you mentioned before, who has Jewish background and breast cancer is at an increased risk of finding a BRCA mutation. And anybody who has either a personal or family history of breast cancer, in addition to a family history of some of these more rare cancer types like ovarian cancer, pancreatic cancer, a family history of male breast cancer is another good one. So those are kind of the main ones that we wouldn't want to miss.
Thank you. Thank you. That's interesting. So let's kind of turn to our other panelists, the patient perspective. I'm going to ask each of you pretty much the same question. What led you to uncovering your risk for hereditary cancers? And so the way you appear on my screen is how I'm going to call you out. Denise, we'll start with you, and we'll just kind of go around clockwise, if that's okay.
After ongoing mammograms, starting very young, I had my first lump at the age of 16. And at that time, they just took it out and they told me nothing. And going to a women's clinic for years, my plan was given to me to come every 6 months for a mammogram. I was never offered genetic testing, even though they had a history that my mother and my father, and later on that a brother had died from breast cancer. And so going every 6 months, I was finding myself going over and over again, having biopsies. And actually I ended up with 5 of those little clips in this one breast because they kept finding classifications, but still never mentioned anything about genetic testing. And my sister was doing some studies and she mentioned it to me. And when I asked, no one knew at this clinic, and it was a women's breast clinic, about this genetic testing. But to make a long story short, after I was diagnosed and after I had a lumpectomy And then coming back the next year and still having a cancer, I decided to switch doctors. And when I switched doctors, that doctor was, have you ever been genetically tested? And I was, no. And they gave me the test at that point, and that's when I found out I carried the gene BRCA2.
So persistence matters. So the
Yes.
next person is Patricia. Can you give us your perspective on what led you to uncovering your risk for hereditary cancer?
Sure. I have been advocating for about 10 years at the time that I had got diagnosed. And in those 10 years, that was after one of our sisters had passed away of breast cancer, and plus my dad. But my sister was she was the main focus that kind of got the ball rolling on kind of encouraging us to get more involved with understanding the disease. And so I would always go to different functions and I was constantly advocating. It wasn't until I went to this one particular meeting, and there just so happened to be a medical doctor there that spoke on, the BRCA1 and BRCA2 mutation, and that piqued my interest. But up to that point, I was always told that I had very dense breasts, even though, I told them what my family history was. I was always told that I had very dense breasts, but it wasn't until I went to this particular meeting and that was my first time ever hearing about BRCA1, BRCA2. So I began going to her for my mammograms. And as you stated in my bio, she began to advocate for me. And it was really sad because, the insurance companies just kept pushing it back, and it was going to cost me quite a bit of money, to get it done. So that's what piqued my interest. And ever since then, I've just been kind of on the manhood hunt to learn more about the mutation.
Very good. We know that the more you're educated, the better we can help to advocate, not just for our family, but ourselves also. And so since somebody shift everybody around on my screen, Deborah, you are next. You have to unmute yourself, please.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. Well, my experience has been a little different and a little similar to my sister, Patricia. So Patricia really spiked my interest in this BRCA1 and BRCA2 gene when she let us know that she had this and that we should be tested also. So I went to my doctor. They did a referral for me. And as I was referred out, I saw the doctor, an oncologist, and I have to share with you, it was not a pleasant experience because I was told right away that if I wanted this test done, I needed to decide that day whether I would have a hysterectomy or a mastectomy. And I was also informed that the test was very expensive. I asked the doctor, I said, I need to decide that today? He said yes, because this test is very expensive. And like I said, it was not a good experience and I never went back. I know that several of my siblings have been, that they have the gene, and I kind of figured, well, I must have the gene as well. And that has been my experience with this. I would say that I need to educate myself even more and also advocate for myself in this area of my health.
Very good. Thank you for sharing that. And so the next person I have is Ms. Tallulah, and the question is the same. What led you to uncovering your risk for hereditary cancer?
Okay, thank you. So my sister already mentioned our family history with my mom and dad dying from breast cancer. And Then we have an older sister, the eldest, and now right now she is close to like a 35-year survivor. So in 1992, I had my one and only child, and in 1998, I noticed in my left breast that I had like a small little lump that kind of moved around a little bit. And knowing my family history, I was concerned about it, and I went to the doctor. And after, going through, the motions of having a biopsy, I was told I had stage 0 in my left breast, but the cells were kind of scattered. So the recommendation was a mastectomy. And then a year late, and I did that. And at that time, my surgeon did, after hearing my family history, had mentioned to me about a new study that was starting up at Georgetown University here in Washington, D.C., and would I be interested in being a part of this study? And she went into a little detail about the whole genetic part of it. And at the time, I said, yeah, maybe after I go through all of this, I'll be interested. And fast forward just a little bit, a year and a half later, after getting my mammogram, it was discovered in my right breast, I had like a little cell area, but I opted for a lumpectomy and radiation at the time. And then I told her I would speak with the genetic counselor, which I did. And from there, I went through just as it was told, my mom's side and my dad's side, and the different cancers in our family. And when it came back, it was told, I always thought my mom may be my mom. It was my dad's side. And because he had first cousins who had ovarian cancer and two nieces who actually had breast cancer. So my dad's side was the dominant gene of my family. So that's how I discovered that I had the BRCA2 mutation. And, from there, I always say early detection. I found my own lump in my left breast. And then let's see, 15 years later, in 2014, on my incision site where I had my mastectomy, I discovered a lump. At first, I thought it was something in my, actually going on with my implant, because I had implants, reconstructive surgery, and come to find out that I was diagnosed with stage 2. I discovered that lump as well from doing my self-breast checks. And that's when I went through chemo and then 5 years of anastrozole, and then cancer-free for 7.5 years. So that's how my story and my mutations were discovered.
Very good. Thank you so much for sharing that. And so the same question for you, Romika. Will you share with us what led you to uncover your hereditary genes? Cancer.
Hi, good evening, everyone.
Hi.
So actually, my mom just reminded me of something. At 15, I don't know if you remember, but there was a lump. We had a lump, and you carted me off to the doctor, kicking and screaming. And it was decided then that it wasn't anything important then, but just to stay away from caffeine for a little while. And then fast forward, so at 15, that lump was found, and I was wondering, my mother was telling me that after that, at age 25 is when I started my mammograms because of that lump that they found so earlier. And so I went every year, and when I was 43, that's when my cancer was found, and after that, I saw a counselor as well, and we discovered the gene. However, the military, my husband's in the military, and the military does not offer the gene to family members. I meant the BRCA test to family members. I tried for many, many years to get the test,
Hmm.
and I was told no, and over again. And we were just about to come out of pocket when I discovered when it was discovered that I had a lump in my right side. So that's what led me to be tested for the BRCA gene.
Okay, very good. Glad you found that. And so what I want to do is kind of, we're all family here and you have family members here. So how hard is it to talk to other family members about their risk and the actions to reduce their risk? Because we all said that you all have the gene. So what conversations are you doing with your family members outside of just your group? And we'll start with, I got to call you, right? Let's start with Denise again.
So I have a son and a daughter. And so I talked to both of them about getting tested. And I kept calling my son. My son had a lot of trouble trying to get the test. He said he was calling places and he was refused the test every time. I also had a brother who died from breast cancer, and he had a difficult time trying to get tested for his cancer, and also difficult time getting treatment. And my brother, who felt kind of humiliated, when he went to get mammograms, how he was treated by being a male in a woman's environment. My son, every once in a while was laid down, and then I would remind him, did you get tested yet? Did you get tested yet? And he'll try again, and he's like, they say it costs all this money, no one will give me the test. Well, he met his now fiance, and she just happened to be a cancer nurse who worked for a doctor, and she spoke to the doctor she worked for, and they gave him the test. And he did not carry the gene. So my daughter inherited the gene, but my son did not.
Okay, persistence again. You have to be consistent.
Yes.
Very good. What about you, Deborah? Are you having that conversation with family members?
Yes, I am having that conversation with family members. I feel like it's kind of difficult with our younger generation in our family. With my siblings, it's okay. We talk to each other about this, but the younger ones don't seem as much concerned about it as I believe that they should be.
Okay, all right. And it's something that we really need to have that conversation with them. What about you, Patricia?
Well, you know me. You know me, Loretta. But so for me, I always tell people, if I learn something that's going to help somebody, I'm gonna shout it from the mountaintop. So I'm always, advocating, and I feel like our family is pretty proactive. And as a matter of fact, as everybody, I think it was Danielle was sharing, I sent out a group text to the family. I was like, hey, you guys need to get on this call. And I got a response back. Surprise, Deborah, two of our nieces are actually on here. So, that persistence, right? It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter whether it's early in the game or later in the game, but they're on here. So it's getting in their ears. And so that's a beautiful thing to me. Especially after learning about the severity, that the gene mutation came from my father's side. And as Deborah and I were talking, I later learned, it didn't even dawn on me how many of our, like two of our aunts and an uncle and my dad and two of my sisters all passed away from breast cancer. And
Mhm.
so learning that one of them that passed away actually tested positive for BRCA1, you know, for me, it was just like, okay, guys, we got to be proactive with this. We got to educate ourselves. And, you know, we have to be our own best advocates. We can't sit back and rely on the oncologists. We can't rely on other people to spoon feed us. No, we got to get in and we have to do the work. So, you
Very,
know,
very good. That's the kind of persistence and that we need. What about you, Romika?
Yes, ma'am. So my aunt and my mom kept, they'll ask me over and over again, did you get it? Did you get it? Did you get it? And it, sometimes I'd be sitting back, I was like, they won't give it to me. I don't know what else to do. And they just kept telling me I should be vigilant and keep asking and don't take no for an answer. So, I mean, it didn't come to pass because I had to find it myself, but still I kept trying. So, and I would talk to my brother about it all the time because he is he would try to give up as well. So he would call me. He was like, "Mom called me today about she calling you." I was like, "Yeah, she calling me all the time."
Very good. Keep it up, Mom. Okay. What about you, Tallulah? Are you
So,
having that conversation?
yeah. So for me, I thought I was diligent in communicating out to my siblings the importance of getting tested. I know that, and from just for an FYI, I come from a big family. So there's 7 boys and 3 girls. So, and I'm the youngest girl. And I mentioned that my oldest sister was diagnosed with breast cancer, and then Denise, who is after Constance. And then we have another sister, Anna. Anna went into the sister study, and then she got genetically tested, and she does not carry the gene.
Mm.
And however, when she told me that, and she has a daughter and a son, and she has four granddaughters. She said, "Oh, I'm so happy, I don't have the gene." And she had told her daughter that she didn't have to get tested. And I had to correct her because I said, "Well, you're just going off of our side of the family. How about her dad's side of the family? Because you got to look at that too." And I did know that his side of the family had some breast cancer and other cancers. And so with that, I started my own nonprofit, and one of my, the missions of my nonprofit, which is Two for Two Boobs, is all about knowing your family history and having the conversation early and quit hiding stuff. Families not knowing why Aunt, Thelma, only had one breast. Nobody ever wanted to talk about it. Those type of things. So for me, it's being diligent and telling everyone that I know, especially my family members. And of course, I told you my son knows. He does checks. In fact, I think about 3 years ago, he called me saying, "I think I have a lump on my chest," and it was just a pimple. But I knew he was doing it, and he knows that when he turns, 35, he will be tested. And I did find some, and I'm always on the lookout for studies. And I think about a year or 2 years, about 2 years ago, I heard about a Black male study going on where they were looking to test male members, especially in the Black households, for genetic testing. So I did put that out, but only 3 family members, 2 nephews and a younger cousin, decided to do it. And just with my brothers, it's just been tough. And I don't know why, based on our family history.
Well, we find that often with men. So that's a man thing.
Yeah.
But we have got to be persistent, as some of you have already said. Keep nagging, keep talking about it. keep it in their face. So let's
Right.
just
And
turn.
yeah. And
Go on, I'm
Loretta,
sorry.
one last thing that I didn't mention is,
Mhm.
and for my brothers, I have a brother who has been diagnosed with prostate cancer. I try to tell them it's not just breast cancer, right? It's
Mhm.
connected to prostate. And when they did, my genetic testing, genetic history, they found it was from my cousins who had ovarian cancer. So,
Mhm.
I try to put that in their heads as well.
Well, keep up the good work, and I applaud you for your nonprofit. Is it 2 for 2 booths, right?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, very good. Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Let's just kind of turn back to our genetic counselor, Danielle. How do you prepare for genetic counseling and testing appointments? If you have incomplete family history, or if the individual in your family who has been diagnosed with cancer previously do not want to undergo genetic testing or counseling, how do you deal with that?
Yeah, so I think we touched on this a little bit, but just trying your best to get as much information about the family history as possible before you meet with a genetic counselor is important. If you don't have all of the information, but you're still curious, doesn't hurt to meet with a genetic counselor. They can kind of go over the different options that are available. It really hurts to hear stories like Deborah, where she had such an awful experience when she tried to advocate for herself to get genetic testing. I can't encourage people enough to see a genetic counselor if they're interested in genetic testing, because this is all that we do, right? We just talk about genetic testing day in and day out. So we know the insurance coverage is better. We know kind of workarounds or potential programs that might be available to help get the testing covered if it's not covered by insurance. And anybody who has a known mutation in the family meets every single insurance criteria for genetic testing. So your family specifically, there really shouldn't be any issue with getting that covered by insurance. So it can be really helpful to meet with a genetic counselor because they just know all of this information like the back of their hand. And so the other thing I would just wanted to mention is that you can meet with a genetic counselor and decide not to have the genetic test, right? So you can just go and get the information, learn more about what's out there, what's available, and then you can decide not to have it. So just meeting with a genetic counselor doesn't tie you to any sort of genetic testing. And the last thing I'll say is that probably when you went with that oncologist, Deborah, the cost of the testing was much, much different than it is now. So previously it was like $5,000 if it wasn't covered by insurance, which like nobody can afford that. Nowadays, if it's totally not covered by insurance and you don't qualify for any of the assistance programs, it's about $250 out of pocket. So that can still definitely be expensive, but it's a lot less than it was when it was $5,000.
Okay. And we've heard from each of our family members their perspective, but we heard some reluctancy, especially with the men. So I guess I want to ask you this question too, Danielle. What tips do you give family members to encourage them if they have family that's reluctant? Is there any special tips you can give them to maybe trick their family into coming to see a genetic counselor?
It can be really hard. There are some people who are just really not interested in getting this information. A lot of times my trick, if you will, is like, this is really important for your children. It's really important for your grandchildren. This isn't just about you and your preferences. So I try and kind of pull the guilt card in that way. And then the other thing I would say is if the person who, like if the person with breast cancer or the person most closely affected to the cancer just doesn't want genetic testing, then the other family members can try and get their own genetic testing if it's just not working with the person who's the best candidate in the family. We can move on to their children or their siblings or the close relatives that are more open to the idea of genetic testing.
Okay, very good. I know that anytime you put the grandkids in the mix, you're going to get some positive results. So I just want to go back to our panel of patients' perspective and ask this question. What was the risk management plan that you ultimately developed with your doctor? And what were the drivers behind your decision? you know, it's important to know all these risk management options and timing. And so, we're probably going to run out of time, so I don't want everybody to answer, but if you want to give me a thumbs up, then you can go first. Tallulah, I hear you.
Yes.
Okay, you want to answer that
So,
question for us?
yeah, so I told you long before they told me about um, um, lowering my risk factors. And one of them after my surgeries was to take, tamoxifen. But at the time, I think it was just coming out and I was just scared of the side effects. And I thought, to myself, I want to have another child. So I delayed that, which I regret now because now I sometimes think maybe if I had done it earlier, I wouldn't have had like that 15 years later. But after 7.5 years ago, after chemo, I did have an oophorectomy, which was the removal of my fallopian tubes and ovaries, because the type of cancer I have feeds off of estrogen. And I did do 5 years anaroxarol, which is like tamoxifen, but for those women who are in menopausal.
Mhm.
And I am just ensuring that I eat healthier, exercise, limit any of the risk factors out there associated with genetic breast cancer.
Very good, very good. I'm going to also direct that question to you, Patricia. What type of management plan did you use?
Well, after losing, any family member or someone close to you, can be devastating. And so for me, I not only had lost both of my parents and my sister at that time, my husband had passed away of pancreatic cancer. And so by that time, when I got diagnosed, and I just, watched their health decline, like I said, I became my own self advocate. So basically,
Mhm.
I went to the doctors with my own plan.
That's great.
And I told them, I said, this is how we're going to do this, right? And so I integrated my treatment. So I did the traditional, and then I also did some holistic.
Mhm.
And the doctor actually wanted to give me chemo. And the day of the surgery, I was, they had prepped me and they were like, Miss McCoy, you have to repeat back, right? What you're supposed to be getting done. And I said, yeah, I know you're supposed to be putting this port in me, but we're going to pass on that. And yeah, they weren't too excited about that. And I just said, I have a really good feeling that, when you go in, the cancers are going to be gone. And sure enough, it was. But even
Mhm.
after that, when I went back to revisit my oncologist and I told him what the results were, that they had got all the cancer,
Mhm.
and he still was pushing the chemo. And, I was just like, hey, with all due respect, you know, I appreciate you wanting me to get the best treatment for myself, but I'm pretty confident. And I love that he didn't push, back and forth with me, but then he did ask me to do radiation. So we kind of had a happy medium. We met in the middle, but my risk management became my oncologist risk management. And
Mhm.
that's just how I just didn't want to go down. I didn't want to experience what I had seen my loved ones experience. And so,
Very good. Thank
yeah.
you so much for sharing that. That is so empowering. And so we're going to go ahead and start trying to close out because we do have some questions in the chat, and we also have prizes for those that are in attendance tonight. But I do want to ask one final question from Danielle. How many of you these are things that our attendees may be interested in, and how to communicate that genetic testing results with family members and encourage them to learn how they can reduce those risk factors. And what are some strategies you can share with them as a closing remark?
Yeah, so I think what Patricia just kind of was talking about is really helpful. So trying to take away kind of the stigma and the scary side of this and say, knowledge is power. If we know what we're dealing with, there's steps that we can take to reduce the risk of cancer or prevent cancer entirely. So our goal is to, not have the same story as our other family members who've had cancer, because we have the privilege of this information that we can act upon in advance. So I think that's a good strategy to go about to make it sound a little bit less scary and a little bit more empowering. And then specifically related to, how do we talk about this with children or young adults? Because we get this question a lot. And really, so I did attach a paper there that goes into all this in a lot more detail, but in general, we recommend trying to be as open as possible and kind of letting them lead the conversation. So if you just want to start out with the very basic, oh, I tested positive for this genetic mutation. And if they say, oh, okay, then we're done with the conversation for that day, and then just kind of answer questions as they come along. So if the person has a lot of follow-up questions, they're probably ready for a more in-depth conversation at that point, versus if they don't have a lot of follow-up questions, they'll probably ask questions later on, and you can kind of answer those questions as they come. So that's kind of one of the main recommendations, is to let them guide how much information you're giving at a time. And then the other thing is to try and stay calm and not emotional when you're giving this information, because a lot of time kids will take their cues for how they're supposed to feel about things from their parents. So if their parents are really upset or really scared to talk about this, then they're going to interpret this as a more scary thing, versus if you talk about it kind of more matter of fact, and this is something we'll deal with when you get a little bit older, they're more likely to not be as scared about this and as scared to bring it up in the future.
Okay, any final thoughts on that? We'll start with Denise. Do you have any final thoughts? Any of you?
Yes, my final thought is, like Patricia was expressing, that you have to take charge of your journey. And for me, I was on tamoxifen, and I already had a double mastectomy, and I did no longer have breast tissue in my breast. I had stomach tissue. So I didn't understand, and I had a hysterectomy. Why am I taking this drug to block hormones when I don't have them? So when I posed that question to my doctor, he went in a meeting with other doctors and came back and said, no one ever asked us that question. You really don't need to take it. So that is taking charge of your journey and asking questions and being persistent.
Very good. Take charge of your journey. What about you, Deborah? Final thoughts?
Okay, thank you. My final thoughts are right in line with the sister who just spoke about being persistent and being on your own journey and taking your health and taking charge of your health yourself, not depending on someone else to do it for you, and to continue to encourage, I would say in my family, the young men in our family to think about getting tested for this gene. So I appreciate everyone that's been on this panel.
Thank you. Final thoughts, Patricia?
Well, my final thoughts, and I guess this is a nugget that has always helped me out, is once you learn that you have this mutation, and also Miss Loretta and Tia and Yvonne serving on the breast cancer research, program. When we would go to Washington, D.C., you learn all of this great information. But with that, and knowing that you have this mutation, what's next? And there's always, how do I manage this? Because you always have the questions: is it dormant? Is it, going to spark? What's going to happen? And so my final thought to that is always just make sure that you stay. I love Baser. I thank you guys for putting this together, Miss Loretta, Tia, and Yvonne, and Miss Tallulah. Thank you guys for pulling this together, because I feel like with this kind of network, then more, we can actually take this experience and share it with others. And who knows, maybe you'll have multiple, online seminars to educate the masses.
Mhm.
So thank
Thank
you.
you. Thank you. All right, Mr. Lulu, final thoughts.
So I'll just say ditto to what's been said, but add as a special message to those who have genetic breast cancer, which I call it, is surviving. So for me, it's 3 times hearing it, right? And you're a survivor. Well, I'm beyond surviving. I'm thriving. I'm not looking back at where I came from. I'm enjoying where I am now and looking forward to my future. Will it come back? I don't know, and I pray that it don't, but I made it through and I'm going to live my best life. So I encourage those people who have, been told you have genetic breast cancer to know that, and to know just because you carry the gene does not mean that you're going to get breast cancer or any cancer. And take the awareness to action. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you. Okay, Romika, final thoughts.
I just want to thank you guys for having me. This was more of a learning experience for me personally. I just want to thank you guys. I'm going to continue learning. I don't know everything yet, and I'm still on the other side of it, but with having small children, I got to stay vigilant and I got to keep my kids safe and make sure that they're tested when the time comes. And I just enjoyed learning tonight. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you to all of our panelists that have been on with us. And there has some great information in the chat box. So you can click on any of those links to find out more about what we're discussing here tonight. So feel free to click on at any time. And Yvonne is going to come on next, and she's going to do the Q&A section and share with you what her program, Sisters Are Us, Circles of Survivors, is all about. After Yvonne finishes, if you give us a few more minutes, we're going to get to those door prizes. So Tia is going to come on and talk about My Style Matters, what they offer, and then she'll spin the wheel for the prizes. So I just want to thank you guys for being here, and don't forget to click on those links over in the chat box. And so now I'm going to hand it over to Yvonne. Yvonne, if you'll come on and do the Q&A part. You will have to unmute
We have
yourself.
a question.
There you go. There you go.
I'm sorry. We have a question. More so, yeah, a question from Myra Moore. She said, I am concerned that my son's father, 3 uncles had prostate cancer. I had breast cancer. First cousin had colon, lung, and breast cancer. I have not been able to get them to get checked for prostate cancer.
So I would say, first of all, it sounds like you might be a good genetic testing candidate, as well as your son's father might be a good genetic testing candidate. So that might be a helpful step. And then just making sure that your sons are telling their physicians about the family history of prostate cancer. And if they're not being heard by those physicians, maybe shopping around for a different physician who is hearing them and hearing this family history. I will say, I'm not a physician, but typically we don't start prostate screening before age 40. So if they're under 40, that could be why they haven't started it yet. But just making sure that you feel comfortable with the physician that you're reporting this family history to, and you feel like you're being heard.
Okay, and this question comes from Lynette. She said, do you find that hereditary issues are more difficult to describe with family members? Has anyone discussed other hereditary diseases in your family, like sickle cell? Did that make the conversation easier? So she didn't put that one. Let's see. Question for Danielle. At what age do you suggest parents tell children about their possible hereditary risks. We have 2 teenagers who know that mom has cancer, but we have not yet discussed that fact that they may have inherited the BRCA2. We don't want them to grow up with the fear of developing cancer, so we have been waiting to tell them.
Yeah, I think this goes back to those 2 things that I was talking about before, just trying to be open and trying to remain calm when you're talking about it for the first time. There's not necessarily a magic age for which we found that it's a good time to talk about this. We have had families where they wait until people are like 25 because that's when we really start breast screening in females. So sometimes they'll wait till tell their child at 25. And we find that that doesn't always go well because then they feel like this was like a secret that was kept from them their whole lives. And so the information kind of feels different to them at that point. So I would say, you know, you don't necessarily wait until it's time to act. I think it's helpful to kind of share this information over time so that they have time to process it.
Let's see. It says, I don't have a family history of breast cancer. However, I did have TNBC stage 2, and my surgeon insisted I have a genetic test that showed BRCA1. And my 2 adult son who did not have the mutation, for which I was very grateful. I think she was just pretty much making a comment. It wasn't really a question to you, Danielle.
Yeah, but it reminds me to just say one thing that I forgot to mention in the guidelines of people who should have genetic testing. If you've had triple negative breast cancer at any age, doesn't matter how old you were when you were diagnosed, you are now a candidate for genetic testing. And that changed very recently. It used to depend on how old you were. So now they're saying any woman with triple negative breast cancer, no matter how old, should have genetic testing. So that's one thing I just wanted to circle back on. And the other criteria that I missed the first time around, if you have had genetic testing and it's been a while, if it's been more than 5 years since you've had genetic testing and your genetic testing was negative at that time, meaning they didn't explain the personal or family history, it's probably time to come back and get updated testing because our technology has changed a lot over the past 5 years. If there's a mutation in the family already identified previously, that's you probably don't need to come back because we've kind of already explained what's going on with the family. But if you had negative testing more than 5 years ago, I recommend coming back and doing it again.
Right. Danielle, so I have a cousin who a couple years ago died from triple negative breast cancer, and she has 2 sisters. And they always say, we don't have a lot of breast, cancer on our side, but they should definitely get tested because she had triple negative.
I think it's definitely worth meeting with the genetic counselor. They
Okay.
might not be covered depending on their insurance and their family history, but any woman who has a history of triple negative breast cancer will now get covered.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And the final question that just came through was, did any of the panelists use integrative treatment? Can you share that experience?
Like Patricia, I did both. I incorporated both.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so-
Oh, go ahead. Yes. Mm-hmm. For the sake of time, yes.
Okay. All right. So that concludes the Q&A period.